Hello everyone, this is part 10 of What If Naruto Got Lost in Time, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. His ramen steamed in small wafts, cooling quickly against the rain and buffeting wetly against his face. With rainy eyes that matched the scenery, he felt that his appetite had long since diminished in the midst of his onslaught of depression. Sadly, it took him a while to even realize to call it such. When Sakura had pointed out with that melancholy look that formed over her gummy pink lips that he had stopped smiling for a while now, he didn't exactly know what to tell her. Because, for Sakura, everything was in black and white, with gray undertones, and that was that. And it wasn't her fault, Naruto mused as he used his chopsticks to pick up the noodles. Bad things don't happen to Sakura, bad things happen to people around Sakura, and then by a chain of events she gets affected. To that end, Naruto would never want Sakura to have any bad fortune bestowed upon her at all, but there were kinds of pain that could only be understood by personal experience. Loneliness was one of them, dark and inky in its blackness, coiling around his very eyes and frothing against his feet. The pain of true, extreme loneliness. And suddenly, just as sharp as the S of pain that had washed over him, did he hear the sound of a bowl breaking next to him. He heard it the same time he felt it. Vaguely he would remember the sound of the ramen chef placing the bowl next to his fellow rain-soaked companion, and it was the only warning he had ever received. However, if he only remembered the warning some 4 months later, then it wasn't really a warning, was it? But, nevertheless, the hot liquid splattered his bare legs like liquid fire, and if he hadn't had the life of a shinobi, he may have been on the ground in pain. But he had, and he placidly looked down at his feet in the dim haze of simple-mindedness and hadn't noticed the spring of pain that came along with the hot broth that pulled around his feet. If things had been different, or maybe a different person, Naruto would have turned back to his food, but that wasn't the case. What? The voice was one of the most heart-wrenching he had ever heard in its simple and soft agony, so small and tiny and broken that it hurt to ever hear it, rasping barely over the clatter of the rain on the other side of the stall. The hell? Even with the curse, the voice didn't change pitch. Naruto looked up, startled, to meet his own rainy blue eyes to hazelnut brown ones. Naruto. His name carried a bitter undertone in her voice. His eyes widened. She looked the same. Rin. Her brown hair was mussed and deesping a little at the bottoms where it hadn't quite dried, and the small droplets of water looked crystallized as they dropped and scattered to the floor. The bandages on her cheeks were spread a little near the seam that met her cheek, and the edges were beginning to brown. Her cheeks weren't as plump as they had been, coloring with tinged pink as she breathed in faster, and her lips were round and gummy, the way he remembered Sakura's looked when she got upset at him. For an instant, he was about to brighten into a smile when her storming eyes stopped him abruptly. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Where the hell have you been for the last 2 years?" she shrieked. "Rin, I know you listen to me. Where the hell have you been for the last 2 years, huh?" Exclamation mark. You don't just disappear like that. Ever. You can't just abandon your friends and think that it'll be alright, think that we won't care. Do you have any idea how terrible it was when we suddenly woke up and you were gone? Like you had disappeared off into the distance and we had no idea where you were, when you would come back, if you ever were coming back, and did you have any idea how much it hurt? Her breath rattled in her chest, and in the wake of her screaming the ramen chef and Naruto both were stilled. It hurt a lot. Her voice dropped back into that whisper quality, shoulders shaking uncontrollably and her lip quivering ever so slightly. You have no idea though. It hurt because we trusted you and belly-fed you, and where did it land us? Her bitter voice trailed off until the pitter-patter of the rain had drowned over them in large watery edss like a grave on the sea, with nothing more than a sprinkled light passing from the depths above them. Rin's breath heaved in her chest, bursting into her lungs, and this fiery and painful sensation was welling up from somewhere inside her, and it hurt. "Say something, god damn it," she yelled at him, swiping the chopsticks that lay unused on the counter, and throwing them at him. Naruto had nothing to say in his defense, not bothering to even dodge the flying eating utensils, Nothing that could possibly justify his actions to the girl, no the woman, she was most definitely a woman now, that stood before him, with an open grieving heart that was breaking in front of him. But the emotional stress was getting to him. Slowly, he put his head in his hands that were rested on his knees, shaking his head, and the gloomy ashen color of the storming sky made his sunshine hair look flaxen, and almost dull. I'm so sorry, Rin. He sighed at last, sounding just as broken as the woman before him. I really am. If I could have told you, told any of you, I would have in an instant. Rin froze so suddenly, that Naruto was tempted to look up. The moment that she pulled her hand back as inconspicuous as possible to did he realize what she was reaching for, and decided it would be better not to alert that he knew she was holding a kunai behind her back. She must have been upper Chunin now, maybe even special Junin, regarding her stealth. But she had a while to go before she could fool him. What? She started slowly. Do you mean by that? He paused. This was going to mean everything. No. This was everything right here. This decided his very future, his very fate that he now cradled in his hands so gently. His next answer was going to decide whether he would leave this time period, and never return more out of necessity than of his own true decision. He would never see Obito, and Rin, and Kakashi, and Minato ever again, although, it didn't seem like right now he'd be able to spend time with them the way he had before, considering their opinion of him now, and he'd have to return to his own, very sullen, and very saddening time period. And as he watched Rin's face, she was all grown up now, with sculpted cheekbones that no longer resembled a cute child, with a pointed chin and dark eyes, and look at her, even ready to draw a kunai against him. He knew that there were only two options that laid out with him right now. He could feel her tense as the seconds passed by, and could watch her shoulders still and the muscles tighten ever so slightly through the saffron fringe of his bangs. He could feel the small shaking that the thousands of torrents of rain caused upon Konoha's soil, trembling in the sheer power of so many sheets of droplets hailing down on it that it was overpowering, and he could hear it begin to slow its erratic tempo, the rhythm slowing and the clouds lazily moving on. He took a deep breath. Everything, Rin. She blinked. The muscles that had tensed in her arm relaxed a bit, but not by much. What do you mean? She echoed herself, cautiously. I never told you guys anything. He began in a quiet voice that matched the hushed tones that she had set. Ever. Nothing was true, well, the useless things, but I never truly told you anything about myself that was true. You see, I couldn't. I can't still. And just as quickly, did the shoulder pull itself forward and the glint of steel flickered off the shiny edges of the stools. But I can tell you right now that I'm not here to do anything harmful to Konoha. Never. I swear it. What good is a liar's word? She shot back scathingly. His eyes met hers, and once again, just like when they first met, she was pulled into the swirl of perfect blue that centered on his iris. It was nothing but pigmentation, she had to remind herself, nothing but good genes and lots of ancestors with pretty eyes. But there was something about the way his eyes glowed so dimly with the rainy clouds and how they were so deeply ingrained with the swirl of the sky, that they looked nothing like the scientific explanation of them, but as if they were actual windows into the soul. He was an interesting person, this Naruto. With his intricacies and his quirks and the way he let you finish his sentence that way he didn't give anything away, or the way he made the most utter blasphemy of excuses and there was no way they were real, but he said those to keep you captivated with their humorous input so that the real answer was never questioned. He was full of lies, just a web that spun around wildly and there was no such thing as truth. But she was curious. Curiouser and curiouser. Then prove it, she said suddenly, interrupting both their thoughts. Naruto thought for a moment. How to prove that he wasn't lying, when in truth, there was nothing that he could tell them without telling them the truth. Times like this he wished he was Kakashi, the older, conniving version, because Kakashi always knew how to say the truth without actually saying the truth. If that made any sense at all. Let's find everyone, he said finally, and I'll tell you all. She blinked at him in suspicion, but said nothing else. All right, she nodded, pulling the kunai into her pouch again, but not too far, she didn't know when she'd need it again. I'll take you to Hokage Tower. Hokage, huh? Naruto smiled somewhat whimsically. The old man finally stepped down, huh? Minato's been Hokage for almost a year now, Rin started cynically. But you didn't know that, did you? Actually I did, Naruto quipped. April 17th, with his address to the people. A bit like his inauguration. If Rin was surprised at all, she held it back well. The only sign was the small downward quirk of her lips. You're well read. She shot him a look as they walked. Did your spies tell you that? He rolled his eyes, hands in his pockets. No, everyone knows, it wasn't exactly a secret. Rin growled low in her tea. A bit put off, maybe because it was true and she had been bested, because everyone did know. Rin didn't say anything in defense, opting to watch the stores they passed in the rain that had turned to a light drizzle. And how's he doing? Naruto asked softly, more out of conversation than out of curiosity, because he already knew. This had to be almost one more year now at best until Kyuubi attacked. Fine. Her tone was clipped. He's been busying himself as Hokage, Obito and Ayachunin, and Kakashi as a Junin. We still go on missions with him though. But we hardly see each other as much since. She trailed off slowly, eyes moving over to him in a meaning subtlety that wasn't lost on him. I'm sorry, he said again. And I promise to explain it once we get to everyone. Rin nodded slowly, as if not convinced of that. But maybe, she wasn't convinced that this was real at all. She had dreamt of meeting Naruto again, they all had, especially in those terrible months after he left, and after a while, she had begun to wonder if maybe they had dreamed it, maybe it never happened. No one knew anything about Naruto, his description didn't fit with anyone in other villages, and his similarity to Minato and his blood record in the hospital were the only tangible threads of him. You shouldn't apologize to me. Rin snarled quietly. You should apologize to Obito. Until now, that is, as said man that had haunted them for 2 years patted along sullenly with her. And the way her team was affected by it, how Obito was affected by it, made her heart clench. Just remembering that pain that still had left a long and jagged scar over her heart hurt to reminisce about. Rin squeezed her eyes shut. The more she thought like that, the more she realized that she was really hoping that this wasn't a dream. I know, he agreed, I soft. I will. And that she was really hoping that this was the right decision, that her personal emotions weren't going to danger her country because of a possible threat right next to her. She took a deep breath, and made sure that Naruto couldn't read her face, even though the man next to her made no such glance. She wanted to believe that Naruto wasn't a threat, she wanted to believe that what he had been when she and her team had traveled with him, befriended him, that this was that same man that he was then. Or maybe, that was nothing but a figment of his personality and his job and now the truth would emerge, or would it? How could they know for sure, and it was beginning to make her shoulders tense in anxiety. Naruto, even with his lax and flippant posture and his relaxed shoulders that smoothed out over planes of compact lean muscles that ended in his pocketed hands, was just as tense as she was. For different reasons. He didn't know what to say, but he had already made up his mind, consequences of his actions be damned. He would have been perfectly fine in telling them his whole story except for the weight of such a calamity would then be transferred to them, and the entirety of the future may be so different when he returned, or maybe there wouldn't be a future at all. Unlike Rin, he wasn't worrying for his country's safety. He was worrying for the world's safety. The cons and pros were weighing themselves in his mind, throwing in his personal feelings as much as he was trying to keep them out of the scale. And his brain was so overloaded he didn't even know where they were going. Rin looked over to his stony face cautiously. She remembered a flash of the red demonic eyes she had seen before, and her doubts, if possible, increased. Little did she know she wasn't the only one who became scared when Naruto was in deep thought, and looked so cold. Naruto. She was tempted to put a demeaning suffix at the end of his name, but decided against it. He blinked at her laconically, as if waking from sleep. It was as if he was drinking in what he had been looking at for the past few seconds now for the first time, taking in the looming Hokage tower in front of them and the steps that were now at his feet. Yeah. He began to walk up the steps, and she followed slowly. Dot. When they entered, Minato had dropped his pen that he had been holding between his lips, carrying a rather large and copious amount of papers and transferring to the pile that was probably the signed ones, and the papers had scattered to the floor in a mess of white, like feathers falling from a bird. The window had been opened, the wind billowing in softly and the papers went flying everywhere, like a whirlwind of sallow that dusted over the room in its papery mess. It was going to be a real hassle to clean once this entire mess was sorted out, because that was a lot of paper. But when the identical blue eyes met, Minato was left to gape in shock. Rin had expected such a reaction, but still had flinched subtly. Naruto knew that when this was all over, he would look back at this and laugh. "En Naruto," the Hokage said the word gradually, almost skeptically. Naruto waved with a placid smile on his face, a bit melancholy. "Hi. We're waiting for Kakashi and Obito to get here, sensei." Rin butted in coldly, not to her teacher but more to Naruto. "So that way he can explain to us," she added, as if to jeer. "All right," Minato said slowly, watching Naruto with those same, cobalt eyes. Obviously distrust was something in the bargain here, but there was something very, very off about Naruto. And it wasn't just because the man had been missing for 2 years and suddenly he had appeared again like it was completely expected of him, even waving and saying hello in greeting and appearing with Rin at his side, although something told Minato that was because he was nervous more than anything. That was odd and reason enough to think that something was off with Naruto, however, he somehow overlooked that and was actually noticing something altogether very different. It was because of the way he looked. He couldn't have been a day older than what he had looked like 2 years ago. Same slightly chiseled jaw, and the cheekbones that were set high and protruded a bit to round his eyes out more. Those same cheeks still had 3 whisker fine scars on them, matching and made him look a bit like a fox. Even his outfit was the same. He had the same black and orange jacket, and black cargo shinobi pants with the standard sandals and the fingerless gloves, although his shirt had changed. He hadn't grown at all, and his hair was the exact same length down to perfection as it had been in his memories. His eyes were still clear and blue, although no longer shrouded in the mirth they had been. It reminded him of the way grandparents looked at younger generations. And that was enough to be suspicious of him, whether he went missing for 2 years or not. They stood in silence, the paper fluttering between them with the shifting wind and Rin fidgeting nervously in the backdrop of constantly moving white. "You got the position finally, huh?" Naruto smiled weakly, looking around the room at the way Minato had furnished it, noticing it looked a bit like the way it would when Tsunade was done with it. A tad messy with the papers fluttering about, and looked like the way it had when Konohamaru had boarded himself up in here. Wooden panels for flooring and a wooden desk with the word for Hokage on it, and open windows that reminded him of the way Jiraiya used to hop through them and Tsunade used to yell at him for it. Minato watched him closely, and it was different from the way Rin did. It made him nervous. "Yeah, nice job. Not worth the paperwork though." Naruto was surprised that Minato was willing to make small talk with him, although come to think of it, it did seem in his nature. "So I've heard," Naruto said pleasantly back, and wasn't prepared for the harsh statement that retorted him. "From your own country's cage," Minato had rebutted sharply. Naruto sent him a laconic smile. "My cage sat on the exact same chair you did, Minato." Apparently the spy theme was rather common explanation for his disappearance. "Don't call me that," Minato bristled, and Naruto found himself surprised again. Not because of Minato's harsh and rather hurting statement, but because it reminded him so much of himself when he was younger, that same fiery temper. "All right, Hokage-sama. This wasn't a fight he had to win. But I do speak the truth. I find that hard to believe." Naruto shrugged indifferently. "It's your opinion." "It is." The Yondaime of Konoha agreed. "But it's a shared opinion." Naruto's side glanced to Rin, who squeaked very quietly at the attention. Naruto was very aware that he was getting into that rather testy edge in his personality, the one that bordered very close to Kyuubi and the one that made Tsunade and her guards on edge, and apparently Rin as well. And Rin didn't even know his reputation, yet there she stood, quietly shaking under the silent wrath of his gaze, hooded and aloof and yet so absolutely dangerous. "You're a danger to the village." Minato slid his eyes shut, voice grave, as if he didn't want to say it. As if he wanted to believe that this wasn't true. And Naruto nodded. "You're right, I am." Minato opened his eyes quickly, and Rin's head whipped around, surprised he had said it so quickly. But Naruto met their stares with his level gaze. Rin shivered unconsciously, her scattered memories combining together to remember when Naruto had turned a man's face into a D-sping mess with his bare hands. In truth they were claws, but Rin had only seen the aftermath, and the way his eyes had that same flippant quality to them as they held now. "But for different reasons than you may believe," Naruto added. "I'm not a spy. I don't work for anyone, and I haven't hailed from any other region than Konoha." "Okay. Lie. Kushina was from Whirlpool. But they couldn't know that yet. They could never know that. Minato narrowed his eyes. I don't believe that. And Naruto only smiled secretively. One day, he started wryly, making sure his voice carried. You're going to realize everything, and then, it's going to make a lot more sense than it does now. The day you and your country attacked Konoha. The Hokage cut off with fierce eyes, and Naruto was once again reminded of himself. Naruto opened his mouth to speak. There is no. Sensei, what the hell happened to this place? Obito's tone was light as he padded down the hallway to the Hokage's room. The papers must have fluttered all the way into the hallway, scattering into the wooden rooms, and must have looked quite amusing to Obito, who knew nothing about what was going on in the room. Sen. And then he stopped. And froze. Naruto. He breathed, and he didn't even have to see the front of his hero's face to know exactly who it was, because Naruto looked exactly the same from the day he left. Untouched by the streams of time. Rin was not fazed, already accustomed to the shock of seeing Naruto after encountering it herself and watching the fiery storm that Minato had brewed as well. Obito, where's Kakashi? You didn't bring him with you. Obito's eyes didn't leave Naruto's back. No, he is still in the hospital. Fine, but he needed to sleep some more. Obito slowly regained his composure, voice pieced and cut because he had to keep reminding himself that Rin was asking something. I didn't think it was anything big, but. The black-haired Uchiha trailed off, and he blinked slowly, almost owlishly. Drinking in that this was real, not a dream, he had had many of those, wishing for Naruto to come back in an almost similar fashion as this, but as reality. En Naruto you? Obito choked on his words, a familiar stinging running up his nose and into his eyes, burning him as if his Sharingan was suddenly manifesting, watching the cloudy sunlight hit the blonde hair. And Naruto smiled pleasantly at him, not mad, not happy, just pleasant. And for some reason, Obito found that, seeing Naruto so off-kilter and so unlike the way he was before, determined almost. When the last time he had seen Naruto, the man was always so unfazed by his surroundings, laid back and still intense in a private sort of way. Seeing the determination and that intensity, louder this time, as if it spoke in volumes, made him shiver unconsciously. Since you're all here, Naruto's tone was light. You should all take a seat, this could take a while. Rin and Obito tentatively did as they were told, seating themselves into chairs on opposite walls. Minato didn't. I'll stand. He sounded miffed. Naruto shrugged. Well, I'll start from the beginning. I wasn't lying when I said I was born in Konoha. I've lived my entire life in Konoha, and I'm a Junin of Konoha too. Liar. Minato seethed. You're not in any of my records. Oh, sorry. Naruto laughed sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. I will be a Junin of Konoha, and I will live my entire life here. The three sat in silence, the correction of words slowly churning in thought in their minds. Anyways, so when I said I was a sealing master, I meant it. I learned from the best, I'm sure you know of him even though he may not know of me yet. At first, I was just learning how to make the seals on explosive kunai, and boring things like making a blood seal. Naruto patted on. And then finally, I hit another one of those big unexplained theories in sealing. After I had successfully made a leaf into grass, I was allowed to learn the vast amount of theories on time traveling. No. Rin sucked in her breath. That's crap. Obito hissed. Minato was taken aback, the only true sealing master besides Naruto, and had learnt of some of those theories. How? Silently, Naruto pulled out a pocketed scroll, and it split open as it hit the floor. It was a 4-part seal, of slightly overlapping circles that, at least to Rin and Obito, looked like nothing more than an odd mixture of characters they had never seen in their lives. To Minato, however, it was most definitely another story. My sensei had allowed me to travel around as I pleased, instilling the safety assurances that were the normal precautions for anyone traveling to a new place. Naruto said in a droll, remembering how terrible that was. And it worked, for a while. I traveled to different places, different times that were alike and yet so different. I even saw myself younger a couple times. Naruto chuckled. His eyes and voice softened. And then I came here. I thought it was funny when Rin tried to throw kunai at me, because I had the same height I ate as her and she still thought I was the enemy. Rin pouted, although it was lost whether it was in good nature or not. And then I saw the Yondaime. He continued, looking at Minato's hopeless and lost face in front of him. And everywhere, especially in Konoha, he was a hero. Everyone knew about the Yondaime, and what he did for the country in the war, among other things. But when I met you in person, it was one of the coolest experiences in my life and I couldn't help but tag along. Naruto said softly. Minato clenched his fist as he watched the flickering emotion on the boy's face, and then looking down to the perfect time scroll at his feet. He thought about it for a long time. Impossible, he decided suddenly, even though the living proof was right there. It's not, it can't. Naruto watched him struggle in confusion with his aloof eyes, watched as his students looked at him with empathetic eyes, because this was a decision that he had to make, and they would follow. Do you remember? He asked pleasantly, noting how Minato's eyes didn't leave the scroll. You must have been 12. Maybe 11 or 10. You had even come up to me, said my name was weird because it was like the things in ramen. And no, Minato denied it quickly, even though his memory had pieced together a smiling blonde-haired fellow, who was quite a ways taller than him, backdropped against a pretty delphinium blue sky dappled with clouds on the horizon and had watched that same sky with tired, sad eyes. And we went out to ramen, and then you bragged about Jiraiya, and after he showed up I decided that I would leave you two to your own. Minato was watching him now, the truth welling up, and he knew it was the truth this time. And do you remember what I asked you? He held his breath, gambling everything that Minato would remember a fellow with sunny blonde hair that was a part of a small memory from a time when he was nothing but a hopeful genin. The breath sucked through his teeth and gave him a cold light-headed sensation as he watched Minato's eyes flicker around, in confusion and understanding and just about everything in between. Rin and Obito fidgeted in their seats. This story should have been labeled as an utter craziness, a lunatic in their sights, yet they couldn't believe that. You asked me if we'd meet again sometime. Minato sighed. And we did. Naruto said simply. It was those words that made it seem so absolutely simple. Just so. Yeah. Minato nodded. We did. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.